Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
James Whitfield had always been the kind of man who believed in doing things the right way. At 36, he'd built a solid career as a civil engineer in Charlotte, North Carolina, working for one of the region's biggest construction firms. His co-workers respected him for his attention to detail, his almost rigid honesty, and his ability to deliver projects on time and on budget. Outside the office, James lived by the same discipline. He woke up at 5:30 every morning to run, prepared his own meals, paid his bills the day they arrived, and called his parents in Ohio every Sunday at 7 p.m. His friends joked that he was too predictable, too organized, too serious. "You need to loosen up, man," they'd say during the rare nights they managed to drag him out for drinks. But James didn't see anything wrong with being that way. He believed discipline and commitment were the foundation of a good life, and he applied those principles to everything, especially relationships. That's why, when he met Sophie through a dating app, he was completely upfront about his intentions. His profile left no room for misunderstanding, looking for a serious relationship. Want marriage, kids, and to build a life with someone who shares these values. Most women scrolled past profiles like his, thinking they were too intense, but Sophie responded with enthusiasm. She was 32, worked as a manager at a women's clothing store in a Charlotte mall, and her profile showed wide smiles in sunlit parks. In her first message, she wrote, "Finally someone who knows what they want. I'm tired of guys who are scared of commitment." James felt his heart quicken. Maybe, finally, he'd found someone who thought like him. The first few months were exactly what James had always dreamed of. Sophie was charismatic, funny, full of energy. She made him laugh with imitations of difficult customers at her store, surprised him with home-cooked dinners after long workdays, and listened with what seemed like genuine interest when he explained the technical details of his construction projects. They talked about the future constantly. Sophie said she wanted 2 kids, a house with a big backyard, a golden retriever. James absorbed every word like a sacred promise. After 6 months of dating, he asked her to be his official girlfriend over a romantic Italian dinner. Sophie accepted with tears in her eyes, calling him, "the most special man I've ever met." A year later, they decided to move in together. James found a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe Charlotte neighborhood with plenty of natural light and a balcony Sophie loved. The rent was $1,800 a month, a significant amount, but manageable on James's salary. When they discussed splitting expenses, Sophie explained her salary as a store manager was modest and she was trying to save for professional development courses. "I want to grow in my career so I can contribute more in the future," she said. James, always eager to support the people he loved, offered to pay the full rent. She'd cover half the electricity and internet bills and occasionally buy groceries. She agreed, thanking him profusely. Over time, however, James began to notice small patterns that bothered him. Every time he mentioned engagement, Sophie skillfully changed the subject. "Let's wait until I get promoted first," she'd say. Months passed and the promotion never came. "Let's wait until you finish that big project," she argued next. James finished the project, but Sophie found another excuse: "The economy's unstable, it's not the time to spend on a wedding." He tried to understand. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she needed more time. Maybe he was being too impatient. His friends disagreed. 3 years, James, his best friend Ryan said during a basketball game. 3 years living together and she won't even talk about an engagement date? Doesn't that worry you? James automatically defended Sophie. She had her reasons. She loved him. Eventually, things would line up. Meanwhile, James kept investing in the relationship with absolute dedication. He paid the rent alone, the rising electricity bills because Sophie left the AC running all day, the high-speed internet she used to binge-watch shows. When Sophie asked for money for an online digital marketing course that cost $800, James transferred it without hesitation. She started the course, finished 2 modules, then dropped it, saying the content was too theoretical. When she wanted to take an interior design course, James paid again. The pattern repeated: initial enthusiasm, quick abandonment. James justified it all internally. She was finding her path. He could support them while she figured herself out professionally. That's what partners did, right? The Thursday that changed everything started like any other. James spent the day at the office, reviewing structural plans for a new residential complex. The work was intense, deadlines tight, and he planned to stay late to get ahead on reports. At 7:47 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie. He opened it expecting something trivial, maybe she was asking if he wanted pizza for dinner or complaining about a rude customer. What he read turned his body cold. "We need to talk. I messed up and I don't know how to tell you." James sat frozen, staring at the screen for a long moment. His brain processed the words in slow motion. Messed up. Don't know how to tell you. A wave of nausea rose in his stomach. He called Sophie immediately. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. He called again. Same thing. With fingers trembling slightly, he typed, "What happened? Are you okay?" The reply took 2 minutes that felt like eternity. "I need to tell you in person. I'm pregnant." Pregnant. The word should have brought joy, but the context of her earlier message turned it into a threat. James stood up from his desk, ignoring the curious glances from coworkers still at work, and walked to the men's bathroom. He locked himself in a stall and took several deep breaths, trying to steady his rising panic. They used protection. Always. Sophie insisted on it because she said it wasn't the right time for kids. How was she pregnant? And why had her earlier message mentioned a mistake? His mind began connecting dots he'd refused to see for months. The nights she came home later than usual. The times he called during her lunch break and she didn't answer, later claiming she was in a meeting. The unfamiliar perfume he caught on her clothes once and ignored. The way she always kept her phone face down on the table. James walked out of the bathroom with a decision made. He needed to go home now. Charlotte's traffic was as congested as always during rush hour, turning the 20-minute drive into nearly 40. James passed every red light mentally replaying the last few months, searching for signs he'd ignored. When he finally pulled into the building's parking lot, his hands were sweating. He took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, needing to burn off the nervous energy building inside him. When he opened the apartment door, he found Sophie sitting on the living room sofa. She was hunched over, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red and swollen from crying. When she saw him, she couldn't meet his gaze. Her eyes fixed on the wooden floor as if it held something of urgent importance. James closed the door behind him with a soft click that echoed in the apartment's silence. He didn't sit down. He stayed standing, still holding his work briefcase, watching the woman he'd shared 3 years of life with. Sophie didn't look up. The silence stretched for a full minute before she finally spoke, her voice no more than a hoarse whisper. "The baby might not be yours." The words hit James like a punch to the stomach. He'd suspected, of course. Deep down, his subconscious had pieced the puzzle together during the drive. But hearing it confirmed out loud was different. It was real. It was irreversible. He felt his legs weaken and had to lean against the wall. His voice came out surprisingly calm when he asked, "Whose?" Sophie finally lifted her eyes, and James saw there a mix of guilt, fear, and something that looked like self-pity. She began to speak, words tumbling out like a confession to a priest. The man's name was Nathan. He was a frequent customer at her store, a businessman who bought gifts for his wife and daughters. James felt a bitter laugh threaten to escape his throat. The wife and daughters. Of course. Sophie explained how Nathan complimented her, how he made her feel special, desired, interesting. He looked at me differently, she said, as if that justified anything. The affair had started 4 months earlier. They met during Sophie's lunch break at a cheap motel 15 minutes from the mall. 15 minutes. Enough time for her to destroy years of trust and return to work as if nothing had happened. James calculated mentally. 4 months meant the affair began right when he was overwhelmed with the residential complex project, working late nearly every night. He was building bridges and buildings while she tore down the foundations of their relationship. And the pregnancy? He asked, his voice still terrifyingly calm. Sophie bit her lower lip, a gesture James once found adorable and now saw as manipulative. I forgot to take my pill a few times. I was distracted, confused about everything that was happening. Distracted. Confused. James almost admired her skill at positioning herself as the victim even while confessing to betrayal. He stayed silent for a long moment, processing. His engineer's mind began working automatically, analyzing the situation like a structural problem. He wasn't married to Sophie. Legally, he had no obligations to her. The apartment was only in his name. If the baby wasn't his, he had no responsibility whatsoever. The clarity of that realization was almost liberating. Without a word, James walked into the bedroom they'd shared. Sophie followed, stumbling over words as she tried to explain, justify, minimize. It was a mistake, James. I know it was a mistake. But it could be your child. The dates are close. We can do a test. If it's yours, we can work through this. I'll end it with Nathan, never see him again, I swear. We can get past this together. James opened the closet and pulled down a large suitcase he kept on the top shelf. He began packing his clothes with methodical, precise movements, shirts folded perfectly, pants stacked carefully, socks organized. Sophie watched with growing desperation, realizing he wasn't listening to her justifications. James, please, talk to me, she begged, her voice rising. You can't just ignore what I'm saying. We've been together 3 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? He stopped packing and turned to face her. His eyes, usually warm and gentle, were cold as steel. 3 years meant everything to me, Sophie. Every day, every moment. While I paid our bills alone, while I funded your courses you never finished, while I planned our future, I believed we were building something real. But apparently, for you, 3 years weren't enough to stay faithful when I trusted you completely. Sophie stepped back as if slapped. It was the first time James had spoken to her like this, no filters, no usual gentleness. She tried another approach, tears streaming down her face. You're angry now, I get it. But when you calm down, you'll realize we can fix this. Couples overcome infidelity all the time. There are therapists, counselors. We're not married, Sophie, James interrupted with a dry laugh. You made sure we never got married, remember? You always had an excuse, always delayed. Now I understand why. You kept your options open. You made sure you had no real obligations to me. He went back to packing, adding items from the bathroom now, his razor, his toothbrush, his deodorant. Sophie followed him like a desperate shadow. Where are you going? She asked. Hotel. For now. And after? After, I go back to my apartment, and you find somewhere else to live. Panic filled Sophie's face. You can't kick me out like this. I've lived here for 3 years. James zipped the suitcase with a decisive click. The lease is in my name. Only my name, Sophie. You never wanted your name on anything, remember? No obligations, no commitments. Well, now you're reaping what you sowed. Legally, you're just a guest who overstayed. He walked past her carrying the suitcase and went into the living room, grabbing his laptop and important documents from a drawer. Sophie followed, trying different tactics, anger, pleading, bargaining. "This is cruelty, James. I'm pregnant. You're going to leave me on the street pregnant?" He turned one last time before opening the door. "You're pregnant with another man's child, Sophie. Of a married man you knew was married. That's not my problem. You have 1 week to find another place. I'll be back next Saturday, and I expect you to be gone." 1 week? "James, I have nowhere to go. I don't have any savings. You should have thought of that before you sneaked off with that man while I worked to support the household." He left the apartment, closing the door firmly, but without slamming it. Even now, even shattered inside, James kept his composure. In the elevator, alone, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what had just happened. His eyes burned, but he refused to cry. Not yet. Not for her. The hotel James chose was modest but clean, a few miles from the office. He checked in for a week, paying in advance with his credit card. In the impersonal room, he sat on the bed and finally let his hands shake. He picked up his phone and called Ryan, his best friend. He told everything in short, direct sentences. Ryan listened in silence, then simply said, "I'm coming to get you. Let's have a drink." That night, in a nearly empty bar, James drank more than he had in years. Ryan didn't offer unsolicited advice or clichés of comfort. He was just there, refilling James's glass when needed. When James finally spoke, his words came out bitter and heavy. "I gave everything, Ryan. Everything. Paid the bills, supported your dreams, was patient with your excuses. And she used me." Ryan nodded. "She took advantage of your commitment, man. People like that exist. They find someone good and drain everything they can." The next morning, hungover and with puffy eyes, James made a decision. He wouldn't be a victim. He'd be strategic. He consulted a family law attorney that same afternoon. The lawyer, a pragmatic man named Henderson, was direct: "You're not married, so there's no asset division or alimony. The apartment's in your name, so she has no claim to it. If the baby isn't yours, you have zero legal obligation. If it is, you'll have parental responsibilities, but that doesn't change anything about her." Henderson recommended a DNA test as soon as possible. There were non-invasive prenatal tests available using a simple maternal blood sample after 10 weeks of gestation. James agreed to proceed once Sophie reached that milestone. While he waited, he kept his distance. Sophie bombarded him with messages and calls he systematically ignored. She tried different approaches: deep regret, indignant anger, emotional manipulation. Once, she showed up at James's office parking lot, causing a scene he quickly ended by calling security. She screamed he was cruel, that he was destroying her, that he never truly loved her if he could abandon her like this. James simply replied calmly, "I loved you more than you deserved. You chose to throw that away." The following Saturday, exactly 1 week after the discovery, James returned to the apartment. Sophie had left, leaving behind chaos, clothes scattered, a note on the kitchen counter. The note was long, full of accusations and self-pity. She called him insensitive, a hypocrite, someone who preached love but didn't know forgiveness. James read it once, then tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash. He spent the entire weekend cleaning the apartment, removing every trace of Sophie. Forgotten clothes went into donation bags. Photos of them together were deleted from his computer. The lingering scent of her perfume was erased with a deep clean. When he finished, the apartment felt different, spacious, more his. 3 weeks later, Sophie reached out saying she was ready for the DNA test. She'd reached 10 weeks of pregnancy. James arranged everything through his lawyer, ensuring it was done officially and documented. The procedure was simple: a blood sample from the mother and a saliva sample from James. He also demanded a sample from Nathan, using his lawyer to pressure him. Nathan, terrified his wife would find out, agreed to the test in secret. The results arrived 2 weeks later. James was at the office when his lawyer called. "Nathan is the father." "No doubt." James hung up and felt a heavy weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't tied down. He had no obligation. He was free. That night, Sophie called, crying. She'd received the same results. "Nathan doesn't want anything to do with the baby," she sobbed. "He said his life is with his family, that I should have been more careful. He blocked me everywhere, James. I'm alone." James listened to the desperation in her voice and felt nothing. No compassion, no satisfaction from revenge, just emptiness. "You chose this, Sophie. Every step along the way was your choice." "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I don't know. It's not my responsibility to figure that out." He hung up and blocked her number immediately. In the months that followed, James rebuilt his life with the same meticulousness he applied to his engineering projects. He renovated the apartment, painting the walls a calm blue and buying new furniture. He returned to his morning runs, finding in exercise a way to process lingering anger. His work improved significantly. Without the distraction of the troubled relationship, he could focus completely. He received a promotion and a substantial raise. Through mutual friends, James learned Sophie had returned to her mother's house in another city. Jobless, with no savings, and pregnant, she had no choice. Nathan remained firmly distant, protecting his marriage and his image. Sophie tried legal action against him for child support, but the process was complicated and expensive. 6 months after the breakup, James was on his balcony one Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading a book, when his phone rang. The number was unknown, but he answered out of habit. It was Sophie. She'd gotten a new number. "James, please, don't hang up," she said quickly. "I need help. Nathan keeps refusing to take any responsibility. I don't have money for the baby. You were always so generous, so good. For the sake of the baby who almost was ours, couldn't you help me?" James took a sip of his coffee, watching Charlotte's morning sun bathe the surrounding buildings. He thought of every time he'd been generous with Sophie, the courses paid for but never finished, the rent covered, the sacrifices made for a future she never intended to build with him. "Sophie," he said calmly, "you spent years rejecting any real commitment. You didn't want to marry, didn't want to share responsibilities, didn't want to build anything concrete with me. You chose to keep your options open, and you chose to exercise those options with a married man who also didn't want commitment. Now you two, who both valued freedom from commitment, are reaping exactly what you planted. It's not my responsibility to fix the consequences of the choices you made." There was a long silence on the other end. When Sophie spoke again, there was anger in her voice. "You're cruel, James. I made a mistake, I admit it, but you're punishing me more than necessary. This isn't justice, it's revenge." "No, Sophie. This is consequence. You wanted freedom from commitment. Now you have it. All the freedom in the world, with no one obligated to stand by your side. That's exactly what you always wanted, isn't it?" He hung up and blocked the new number too. James returned to his coffee and his book. Through the window, Charlotte stretched out in all its urban vitality, buildings he'd helped construct, streets full of people living their lives. He thought of his values: commitment, honesty, responsibility. For years, he'd seen them as weaknesses that made him predictable and boring. Now he understood they were his greatest strength. They were why he was here, at peace, rebuilt, while Sophie reaped the storms she'd planted herself. He didn't feel triumph in her fall. There was no satisfaction in seeing her suffer. What James felt was something deeper, more valuable, the unshakable certainty that he had lived according to his principles, and when everything collapsed, those same principles had held him up. He'd lost 3 years to someone who never deserved him, but he'd gained something no one could ever take away: the absolute knowledge of his own worth. On the sunlit balcony of his Charlotte apartment, James Whitfield turned the page of his book and kept reading, completely at peace with the man he was and the future he would still build. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.